Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk all about things to increase lean body mass, performance, and improve body composition, all without destroying your health in a flexible framework. Today on the podcast, we've got a topic that is kind of related to that. It's the topic of neuroprotection. And we've got my good friend, Dr. Dwayne Jackson, on here. And we compare notes about things that can help neuroprotection. For this one, we stayed more on the nutrition and supplement side. And we purposely didn't compare any notes before the podcast, since I was curious to see if we kind of agree on the same compounds and methods. And so we've got a good chat on that. Make sure to check out all of his wonderful stuff, his Instagram and his website and certification. We'll put all that information into the show notes so you'll be able to get to it. And if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to go to miketnelson.com/podcast. And there you can get all the latest podcasts I've been on, guest episodes, and also onto the newsletter. The newsletter is where I send out probably 90% of the content, and it's completely free to sign up. I work to try to make them educational and yet entertaining at the same time. So go to miketnelson.com/podcast and enjoy the podcast today on neuroprotection with my buddy, Dr. Dwayne Jackson.
So like fighting sports, hockey, contact sports in general, mountain biking, downhill mountain biking, motocross, like sports that I've basically been involved in. And
yeah, there you go.
A lot of times we don't think about the state of our body before we go into the sport. And so I really try to promote this nutritional helmet, because the whole idea, concussion is a complicated progression into CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but it's actually pretty simple when you actually look at the data on inflammation and the impact of said inflammation on the progression of concussion. Because when you look at people who've had concussive injury, there's a whole array of outcomes from it. So I've had 13 clinical concussions, like ones that have been documented.
Oh, wow.
X-rays of the broken bones that I had.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And now there may be people that argue, but my brain feels like it's working pretty good. And I actually never ever experienced any of the post-concussive symptoms that a lot of people experience these days. And so I really dug into it. My wife used to say it's because I have a thick skull. There's like this thick skull theory.
It's protective.
Yeah, it's another helmet, right?
Yeah.
But so I've kind of gone down the route of inflammatory gut health issues, and inflammatory issues are becoming more and more prevalent in younger and younger people nowadays, likely due to a number of different impacts on our inflammatory system through poor gut health, different medications, lack of exercise, lack of just being a kid and being outside, lack of eating proper foods, a lot of macronutrient dense foods that aren't micronutrient dense. And what you find when you look at the literature is that it's the inflammatory issues that exist after concussion that actually will drive from just a regular run-of-the-mill concussive injury with a contusion through to brain damage, if you will. And it's that whole microglia and macrophage transitions from M2 to M1 that seem to drive the progression of a normal, like I said, run-of-the-mill, getting knocked out, you wake up in 10 seconds and say, oh, where am I? Through to post-concussive big issues down the road where we're dealing with personality disorders and motivation disorders, depressive symptoms, all these kind of things. So my focus has really been on, when you're going into the game, make sure you're going into the game in the least inflammatory state you can be in. And there are a lot of data showing that on the first impact of a concussion, followed by if there's a secondary impact within a small period of time, that really drives that progression.
Yeah, the secondary impact can appear to be extremely minor too, which is what I don't think people realize.
And it's 100%. Yeah. And then I know people this has happened to. And I thought, I had my head banged around all the time. These people can't even work anymore.
Oh, yeah. It can be extremely debilitating.
Yeah. And so one of the neat things that there's a cool paper and it's in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disorders. It's an inflammation and traumatic brain injury paper. It's a review. And one of the things they talk about, which is really neat because I didn't know anybody else was kind of thinking this way, was that the second hit doesn't have to be a concussion or a brain hit.
Yeah.
It can be allergy sensitization. It can be, so anything that increases the inflammatory response, an acute infection, a chronic infection, autoimmune disorders, all those things can actually result in the second hit kind of effect where we go from having bang in our head, get woke up and they ask you where you're at, what's your birthday, what day is it, through to actually chronic symptoms that are like fully debilitating. So the main thing I've been really trying to promote is if we're going to go into these sports that we know it's inevitable that we're going to get our bell rung, then it's really important to go into those sports with, the right nutrition on board, some supplementation, and try to control everything from neuroinflammation, keep it as low as you possibly can, to brain blood flow. We want to keep that up. And also we want to make sure that we're promoting neuronal growth throughout our life. So there's a whole bunch of ways that we can do that through obviously nutrition and some really cool supplementations. And I think that's where things like CBD, which you've talked about before, CBD for its effects on decreasing immunity as immunosuppressant works really well for keeping inflammation low.
Yeah. A lot of people, usually pretty high doses though.
100%. That's where the cost prohibitive effect with CBD. Yeah. And I found I've used a number of those different, I've used psilocybin as a supplement, I guess you could call it these days, for my concussive symptoms. I have a few concussive symptoms, post-concussive symptoms, where if I walk on a treadmill and close my eyes, it feels like I'm walking in outer space. If I do these laser tracing things that you can do at some of these places, these concussive places where you have to trace out things. I definitely have some left brain, right brain, but I never ever notice these things, and I think it's literally because I'm constantly focused on neuroinflammation and trying to keep it down as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. So down the route of neuroinflammation, like we mentioned CBD, so we can dig in that to a little bit more, but what kind of doses are you thinking, and would you need to do it for longer periods of time before? And then before we get to that, I guess the better question is for better nutrition, which could be very widely, what would some things you'd be looking at in the nutrition realm before we get into supplements? Because people hear better nutrition and that could be, oh, I had one less Twinkie today, or, oh man, I'm never touching anything that's ultra processed, to one extreme to the next.
Yeah, right through to a full meat carnivore diet. Where it's
totally
the best. Yeah. So a low inflammation diet. So I'm a big promoter of the Mediterranean diet, a little more protein in it than what they recommend in that diet. But the constituents of a Mediterranean style diet with high levels of polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats, relatively low saturated fat intake, and moderate protein intake, which you can vary with your needs with whatever sport it is that you're involved in or whatever. And then high fiber intake and high vegetable intake to support that fiber intake. So not so much fiber supplements, but rather getting all those phytonutritional benefits from eating a really high quality vegetable diet that's got something on the order of 40 grams of fiber per day with quite a bit of soluble fiber, maybe a 3-to-1 ratio of soluble to insoluble fiber, mainly because then we can protect that gut health. Because I believe in my practice that the canary in the coal mine really for where someone sits with inflammatory status is where does their gut health sit? There's very few people that walk around hyperinflamed all the time that can profess that they have excellent digestion and excellent gut health. So I think really we're only getting into the very, very infantile years of understanding gut health and its impact on all these things. But we do know that we can lower inflammation quite well by following a diet that's balanced and has a good level of those monounsaturated fatty acids with a complement of high quality fibers. And then obviously some bacterial components that we can keep those microbiota happy in the large intestine. To me, that's the baseline. That's the very, very fundamental of inflammation to me, is keeping it under control with the diet. There's a number of diets that people enjoy because of other benefits, maybe the benefits of aesthetics on eating a carnivore diet, for example, the benefits of high protein on muscle building. That's obvious. But the problem, and I guess the benefits of ketogenic diet for regulating blood glucose and these kind of things. But at the end of the day, when we start eliminating the different components of the diet, we really start eliminating the variety in our diet, which then eliminates or at least reduces the variety of the bacterial species and the density of those bacterial species in the large intestine. And then we can't take advantage of all those great effects that we get from having a really healthy poop chute, if you will.
Nice. Do you look at, one of the things I do is just roughly analysis I've done in the Flex Diet Cert is, if you don't have any fancy software and you're old enough like I am, where you probably had to pay for the CD-ROM that was like $1,800 to do old school like dietary analysis, and I sound like I'm some dinosaur now, but I'm old enough to, yeah. So luckily, I only had to pay for it once when I wasn't in college, but now you can put them in a chronometer or whatever. But any thoughts about, one thing I've done is just look at the colors of vegetables and fruits. And so I'm trying to look for, yeah, you should have some reds, some purples, and that kind of group of berries and anthocyanins. And then you should have some kind of yellows and kind of your orange and greens for magnesium. So I usually just tell people, just kind of look at how many colors do you have, and don't count the colored M&Ms or Skittles or whatever. And if you've got a pretty good variety, I would say you're probably pretty decent on micronutrition. Obviously, you can go, super far down that rabbit hole in more detail, but.
Great. You're bang on, buddy. And that's exactly, we don't really need to track our micronutrition if we're eating abundance of colors. And that's really those polyphenolic compounds you're talking about that require, so the different polyphenols have different colors. And what's really cool is those thin-skinned berries and thin-skinned fruits that grow because their leaves have to take up that sun for photosynthesis. Those suckers are sitting in the sun too. And so they're very high quality antioxidants that stop from all that reactive oxygen species and everything the sun's going to do to that berry or fruit or vegetable. So the color thing is really neat because that's been promoted. Like my mom promoted the SEVs, and I might have mentioned this in our last talk, but really I just get people to eat like my mom made me in my younger years. And that's probably why my concussive symptoms are very minimal for what I've had. And if my hypothesis stands correct.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny. Yeah. Because that's the main thing I go through people's diets, because there's a lot of green. A lot of people eat green, but very few people balance it out with some red and some orange and some yellow or purples or any of those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so honestly, that's the two fundamentals that I could give to anybody that if you don't want to track or do anything else, is eat whole foods and eat a variety of them. And by a variety, if you're wondering what a variety means, it should be a lot of colors. And that's probably the biggest thing that I do in my job is add color and variety to people's diets.
Yeah, I've even got this. I think I might have got this from my buddy Adam Glass. We call it the grocery store field trip, where go to the grocery store. This is for people who like really just hate variety. It's like, I've eaten these same 12 foods for my whole life, or like you've been around the bodybuilding scene, you have to have tilapia and broccoli, and that's like the best thing, and all this crazy stuff. I'm like, just go to the store, stay on the outside of the aisles, and your goal is to buy at least one or two things that you have not had within 1 to 2 years, ideally ever. I'm like, oh, what do I get? I'm like, I don't care. You could try kombucha, you could try a new vegetable, you could try a new fruit, nuts even, don't care. Just for God's sake, get some variety. And they're always like, what do I get? I'm like, just walk around the store and look and go, I think that's good, and spend the money and buy it. Worst case scenario, you find you didn't like it. Okay, go back and try something else next. Just to try it. And it's funny, every time people do this, they're like, oh, there's all sorts of stuff at the grocery store I've never eaten before. I'm like, yeah.
Right? It's brilliant. That's a great approach. I usually tell people like go around the outsides of the aisles and you pick these things and here's some replacements. But that's a really nice approach to tell them like, yeah, grab some stuff that you haven't had in a while. Maybe you've never had it. And it's funny because I do it a different way, but in kind of an implicit way of doing that is I tell people, if you have a CSA, have one of these boxes of local sourced foods that you get usually in the summer, like ours go here from like May to October. And they send you the vegetable box, and you can order other stuff on those sites. And it's usually relatively organic and local dairy and that kind of thing. But the boxes are really neat because they're seasonal. And you end up getting stuff that you don't even know what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Like fennel and all these things. And because you bought the box, you tend to actually get creative and work with it. And even in I've always been big on nutrition. I just love food, right? So I love variety. But I've noticed, and I said to my wife this year, I said, what's funny, first of all, it's actually more budget conscious to actually eat these good foods when you get them from these local things, because most of them are kind of almost not for profity.
Mm-hmm.
People think they're going to get expensive, but they actually aren't. We're looking at $49 a week for a massive box of vegetables for our family.
Yeah, that's not bad.
It's pretty darn good. And the cool thing about it is it gives you varieties of fruits and vegetables and things that, like, a lot of people would say, oh, I can't eat that. I shouldn't be eating these fruits. Oh, peaches, they're horrible. And it's so weird.
Yeah, that's your problem. You eat too many damn peaches. Has that ever been an issue? I
Well,
agree with what you're saying.
If you go on Instagram and whatnot, people saying that fruit's the reason why we have a diabetes problem in the world.
Yeah.
And I would say actually it's a lie. It's probably a lack of fruit.
Yeah.
But it's neat because you end up like, I wouldn't normally go out and buy like peaches, plums, grapes. Right now we have raspberries, blackberries that grow around our property all the time. So I get those all the time. I wouldn't normally buy that variety of those things, but because I have them, cherries, I have all these things in my fridge. I've been eating these like for the whole summer. And I'll tell you right now, my body composition has changed for the better by far.
Nice.
Just by, and we consider ourselves experts in this area, but this is a forced variety. And with that variety comes, like you said, the variety of the different phytonutrients that are going to help us with inflammation. They're going to help us with gut health. They're going to give us fiber. We're going to have antioxidants. All those things are encompassed into one thing. And that's what I love about whole foods and their effects on talking about concussion, all these things, is that when we eat a variety of diet, we have good digestion and we're eating whole foods, a lot of times we don't have to worry about inflammation and whatnot. And so many people come to me because of all the supplement stuff that I do and say to me, listen, I know I have really bad inflammation. So is there any chance you could, point me in the direction of a supplement? And a lot of times I'll say, can you just throw me your diet real quick?
Yeah.
And it's, whoa, well, no wonder. Right. So
yeah, that was one of I think it was a Paul Chek quote. Supplements, think of them if you're building a boat, are kind of like the gold nails. And if you've got really shitty wood, which is your baseline nutrition, they're not going to help you at all. I thought that was a good analogy.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's about how it works, is that supplementation fills in holes. And a lot of times, even with
it can be useful
diet, we may not see the high enough levels of, say, iron or high enough levels of B12 even. In my case, this is one. So I need to take a betaine supplement so that I can basically activate intrinsic factor and whatnot to get B12 to absorb. And that's because of the medication I'm on for my kidney transplant.
Oh, sure.
I have no clue. Because I mean, most people with B12 just from the meat eating alone are like 3,000%, their daily needs are. There's some great stuff you can do with supplements, but really if you don't have the, like you said, the good wood, then those gold nails aren't going to do shit for you.
Yeah. The other one I heard was things from my buddy Craig Keaton years ago, and it was pretty good. If you look at the analysis of just the average person who's kind of into training and buys supplements, for the most part, they would do better of exchanging at least 80% of the money they spend on supplements and just buy better quality food or more food. Because you look at all the crazy stuff people spend money on that there's almost like no data on. And again, you're probably similar to me. I'm like, I'm fine with people doing that as long as you know what the downside is. We're not really sure what the upside is. Your baseline nutrition, everything else is in place. You want to try something new and crazy? Cool, go for it. But it just seems like people are expecting that's the basic and they're missing out on all the basics and they're just trying to get too fancy too soon.
Absolutely. It's funny because I'm partially guilty for perpetuating that in my younger years, because with being a bodybuilder, it was kind of like the name of the game, right? Pills and powders were what you thought were the thing. But funny enough, I didn't use a supplement for, like, only supplement I ever used was a protein supplement, but I couldn't really afford them back in the 90s.
Yeah.
My parents paid for my food, but they wouldn't pay for my supplements.
And
my biggest years of growth and health and success in pro sport and everything else were in those years of whole food diets. And it wasn't until actually I was on my own, finished my PhD and everything else, and I started buying supplements. And the only supplement right now that I would say, if you haven't focused 100% on getting the best food for your diet, the only supplement I would say that you could benefit really well from, if you can't afford good meat, is a good whey protein supplement just because it's
definitely
still cheaper per pound for pound compared to meat. But you're right. There's a lot of people that come to me with like laundry list.
Yeah.
Like that, of supplements they're taking currently. And you start looking the crossover between them and you're like, man, you're taking like 50 milligrams of zinc a day.
Oh yeah.
And
Guys are notorious for that.
It's terrible. Even companies within companies, ones that I've been associated with recently, they don't even think about when they're formulating sleep.
No, they formulate them all singular.
Exactly. What the hell is this, right? Really, you can muck yourself up. And the other thing is herbs, and I'm sure you've seen this. You get these people that are like, I am like anal retentive. They come to you with like blood work, MRI scans, colonoscopy. They've had friggin', endoscopies, all this stuff. And then they give you a laundry list of their supplements, a lot of herbs. And then you look at their liver enzymes, and their liver enzymes are all mucked up.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, I don't know what's going on with my liver. I don't drink it. And then you're like, you're taxing this crap out of that thing with all those herbs that it's trying to deal with, that change enzymatic control, that change everything in how your liver processes stuff. So, at the end of the day, it's that whole food background. It is the fundamental, and it gives us a job because it's really what people don't follow.
Yeah. And herbals, unfortunately, are notorious for very poor quality control. And I've known when usually the testosterone boosting herbals became popular, like it circles. And I remember one of them, that was a fat loss one. It's about 8-10 years ago. It got super popular, didn't have much data on it. And I knew the raw material suppliers, and I knew that they were literally out. Like, to get legit material, you could not find it because it was a rare herb. It got real popular. Supply didn't meet demand for many years, blah, blah, blah. But there was companies who were selling these things for years after. And I knew they were selling significant volume because I saw some of their numbers. And I'm like thinking, what the hell are you putting in there? Like, where are you getting this from? Unless you had some secret supply you stocked up on or something. I don't know. It's just.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's common. That's very common.
Yeah.
So I mean, and it's funny too, because when we're talking about going back to concussion, in a lot of cases, and I've seen this more and more lately, when parents come to me with children ages 12 to 18, they're usually asking me for what supplements can I give my son, daughter, to perform better, or to reduce the chances that they're going to get a concussion, or reduce this and that. And it's funny because if you look at the diets of these kids, especially like in no offense to the hockey realm, but hockey still has that kind of old school beer and pizza thing going on.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the diets that a lot of these hockey players that suffered, because of severe CTE, like the John Cordicks and all these kind of guys, the old enforcers, these guys were beer drinking bar brawlers, and their lifestyle was like that. They just happened to be okay or decent at hockey, really good at fighting on a pair of blades. And when you look at that, and you look at other people that have had concussive injury that don't end up in a state where they're actually fighting the police in an unconscious rage from concussion, it's pretty interesting because if you start digging into it, the lifestyle factors play a big role. And I really think as soon as your lifestyle goes sideways, inflammation goes up. It's just a natural consequence of lack of sleep, poor diet, and whatever other substances that are going through your body that are doing these problems.
Yeah, totally. On the supplement side, you had mentioned CBD. Any thoughts about, do you need to take it probably like weeks beforehand? Could you take a single dose before? And what kind of dosage are you looking at? Because I actually agree with CBD. There's some pretty good data on it. Again, you can always argue data on concussion in humans is always going to be limited. We're not going to have a randomized controlled trial like they do with the mouse studies, where you whack the humans on the head and give half of them a concussion, the other half you don't. Like, that's just never going to be approved for good reason. But what I've seen is pretty high doses, and in terms of neuroinflammation, at least what I've seen mechanistically in animal data and some limited human data, it's pretty effective compared to other supplements, I would say.
Yeah. So my firsthand experience. So in terms of dosing, I don't notice anything less than 60 milligrams a day.
Yeah. And I would say that's low. I would
Yep.
say,
I don't notice anything less than that.
yeah.
But most people though are taking much less than that just because of the
Oh, totally.
cost
Yeah.
prohibitive effects, right? They're taking
Agree.
like 10 milligrams. So I don't notice anything from 16. The reason why I say I don't notice is because I actually have data on myself, but it's not on any inflammatory factors because my inflammation is generally low. I keep my HSCRP nice and 0.3, 0.1.
Nice.
Keep it zero as much as possible. But I have data from the effects on its immunosuppressive effects.
Oh, yeah.
So because I'm on immunosuppressants, when I first had my transplant, they asked me if I used cannabis products. And I told them, yes, I do for blood pressure regulation. And I use CBD for inflammation. And they said, okay, great. They said, let's keep an eye on your drug levels because you have to keep the CBD stable because if you don't, your drug levels are going to float all over the place. And I thought, there's got to be no way this stuff is that potent as an immunosuppressant to make my immunosuppressant levels to go up when I'm taking this stuff. Funny enough, I quit taking CBD for 10 months. Okay. My tacrolimus levels, which tacrolimus is one of the drugs that they use for immunosuppression in most transplant patients. And that's the thing that they keep it fixed really well. They monitor it every month because it can fluctuate. My tacrolimus levels were steady at 7, we'll call it 7, for 2.5 years. And then when I moved out here at West, I stopped using CBD just mainly because my access to it was just a little bit lower. And so there's no dispensaries around here. I have to drive far to get it and all that kind of stuff. And so I just kind of forgot and stopped taking it. And my tacrolimus levels actually started elevating in the last 2 months. And we could not figure it out for the life of us because they've been steady at the same dose for all these years. What have you changed? And I'm going through things. And then the other day, I'm like, so we'd lowered my tacrolimus dose, and I thought, I'm going to. So it was about a month ago. I said I'm going to try taking CBD this month and see how fast it actually messes up these tacrolimus levels. And honest to God, within like my month's blood work, my tacrolimus went way up. Yeah, so I'm off it now. I'll get my bloods done at the end of the month, and it'll be back down again. So it's good. So in terms of its impact, and that was at 150 milligrams a day.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Tincture. Yeah.
And yeah, so just an oil, just a full oil. And it's pretty cool because that's kind of the best direct way I've been able to measure the effect of CBD. And it's, like I said, it's been in and out 2 or 3 times. And that's the factor that changes my immunosuppression. As an immunosuppressant, which we know will decrease inflammation, then we know that's it's a very potent one. Now, whether or not it's acting on neurons in the brain or acting in the periphery or whatever it's doing, I'm sure it's ubiquitous, right? But that remains to be acknowledged. But I do find that CBD does help a lot with neurological symptoms. Like I get a lot of brain fog, like a lot of mornings, that kind of stuff. But that could be just age.
Yeah.
But I do find that when I'm on a steady dose of CBD, that I don't notice those effects quite as much.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think there's some mice data showing that CBD was helping potentially protect the blood-brain barrier. Because one of the issues when you get whacked in the head is the blood-brain barrier can open up, which is normally trying to keep out a whole bunch of stuff from your brain. So not only do you have inflammation going up, the blood-brain barrier starts to open up or becomes permeable. Now you've got a whole bunch of other foreign things that can float into your brain and start exacerbating a ton of inflammation too, which is interesting.
100%. Yeah, it's cool actually. There's and also it increases. There's some data showing that it increases brain blood flow, I believe, to the prefrontal cortex, which is the area that gets buggered up when we have CTE a lot of times, so decision making, executive function, that kind of stuff. And so overall, CBD kind of hits a couple targets, right? Because there's the whole inflammatory target, like I talked about earlier. That's one thing that we want to target when we're thinking about a concussion, and brain blood flow, which is another one. And I don't know if have you read any data on neurogenesis or anything like that? CBD?
I haven't seen anything with CBD, to be honest. Yeah, I haven't seen anything on that.
Yeah, and that's why I microdose with psilocybin, because there's some decent animal data showing increases in neurogenesis and whatnot with psilocybin, serotonin analogs, these kind of things.
And do you think you can get that from a microdose just because of the accumulated dose over time, or do you think you need a macro dose? I've talked to some researchers and they appear to be very split on this idea, I guess.
But what's neat is microdosing microdose is kind of a funny thing. So I've been doing it for a long time, over a decade.
Oh, wow.
All before anybody was doing it. And it's neat because when it came into into the scene, it was like kind of 100 milligrams or whatever of mushroom.
Of material.
That's right.
Yeah.
But material. But the papers were 100 milligrams of psilocybin. So a lot of people, it got broken telephone from the actual dosing, I believe, into this anecdotal dosing that they were like, oh no, this is
right.
It's back. It's 100 milligrams of psilocybin. So actually it's probably more 5 or 6 milligrams or something. But at the end of the day, it's kind of cool because to answer your question, microdosing for people that are mushroom users, let's call it that, is generally about 1 gram. And they call it that because it's kind of, you do feel it, but it's more of a energetic, positive feeling than it is sitting down and just laughing your ass off and falling on the ground.
The clock on the wall is not melting yet.
That's right. Exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The trails aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Now they will be for some people, right? Because it depends on body weight, depends on exposure. And you do obviously become really acclimatized to dose pretty quick with mushrooms. Within a couple of those 1 gram doses, you can easily take 2 grams to feel the same thing. So to answer your question, really, what is a microdose? To me personally, I get the greatest effect from doing small doses over a long but acute period of time. Works really well, but not as well as taking what people would consider a macro dose, 1.5 grams, in one exposure over the course of a month. There's a really nice it's not a hangover, but we'll call it a hangover effect. There's a afterglow that lasts for a week or so afterward. And they notice this in studies where they look at the psychological profile of people, these things. So yeah, so it's really one of those trial and error things, I think, for most people right now. It's illegal, right? So it is a classified substance here in British Columbia. And then where I live in British Columbia, it's not really illegal. It's just having berries on your counter. So it's kind of a neat, this is kind of a neat place to be able to experiment with that on the concussive side for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And unfortunately, in the U.S., it's still Scheduled 1 federal drug, even though your state legislation may not enforce certain rules or not, which depends upon city and state and all this other stuff. But
and in Canada, we're way looser, right? Because in our actual, the leader of British Columbia, the premier or whatever the hell he is, he decided a couple of years ago, he said that there will be we're decriminalizing all drugs now. But in terms of psilocybin, it was, we're not going to even touch that. So it's they sell it everywhere here.
Yeah. In terms of things that may be legal in the mushroom area, your thoughts on lion's mane? There's some very interesting data about potentially increasing BDNF and related to concussion. Do you think that may have any benefits?
So in terms of the neurogenesis aspect, absolutely. Yeah. So long as the data are transferable from cell culture and animal models to the humans, and the anecdotes are there. Quality lion's mane, it's one of those supplements that people can't do without it when they start using it. Yeah, as long as you're getting a product that's got high enough levels of adenosines and hericinones, which are the things that increase NGF and BDNF and all those things, then absolutely. And I mean, obviously I put a plug in here. That's why I created Vibe Mushrooms, because I noticed I love, it was mainly for lion's mane and cordyceps, but then
interesting.
But it was because when you look at the mushroom world, the functional mushroom world where we're allowed to buy them legally, it's so variable in the quality of the products. And that shows up when people take an extract and one's light brown lion's mane, and the other one's dark brown, and the other one's red. It's like, where's the quality control on this? And so that's why I really focused on making sure that all the mushroom offerings that we have the components tested that are unique to that mushroom. Because a lot of times people say, oh yeah, this has 50% beta glucans. You're like, yeah, so does freaking oatmeal. Like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like the beta glucans are nice and it's good for the guts and they have lots of benefits, but that's ubiquitous across anything with.
Sure.
But yeah, so when it comes to mushrooms, if you're choosing a brand, you got to make sure that if you're liking your lion's mane and it's working for you, great. But if they show the level of at least adenosines, because hericinones are hard to get measured, they're both really tough to get measured by companies. But if you know the company is at least focused on concentrating those things, that's where you're going to get the magic with these products for sure.
Yeah. And I've noticed that we've talked about this before too, that there's a lot of, unfortunately, really horrible mushroom supplements out there, and there's lots of papers you can refer to. It's not just our opinion here, but yeah. And I think that's why the results are always so varied. Like anything, sometimes they're underdosed. Who knows how much is in there? How much of the active compound is it? You get into, is it the fruiting body portion, or my little air quotes here, the root portion of the mushroom? And how is it grown? Is it in the US? Do they have to get it from other places? And yeah, I'd just say do your homework, go with a reputable source, because it's extremely variable.
Highly variable. And you're right. And then there's a whole bunch of opinions in there.
Oh, yeah.
That like Reddit is so full of mushroom opinions. There's a pile of opinions. And the problem is, like, for example, you mentioned taking it from the mycelium, the roots.
Yeah, mycelia, or the fruiting body.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of ways to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so for example, like we use cultured mycelium, fermented cultured mycelium in our lion's mane. And that's because we tested our fruiting bodies and our mycelium, and we were able to get the highest level of erinacines from the mycelium.
Interesting.
But it's not mycelium grown on grain.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Culture.
Okay, yeah,
so it's pure mycelium. And so as soon as people see mycelium, generally speaking, because of the weekend warriors on Reddit, they end up thinking that it's mycelium grown on grain. And when that's the case, absolutely, what you end up having is a case of a highly possible contaminated or adulterated mycelium, because you've got this rice grain or whatever grain they grew it on.
And they usually just grind it all up.
They grind it up. Yeah. They have this log of it and they just grind it up.
Yeah.
And then you have on the other side of the coin, it's really expensive to do liquid culture, as you could imagine. And so fermented liquid culture is a completely different monster, but so many companies don't use it because they can just call it mycelium when they grow it on grain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a tough one. And then the fruiting body obviously has a whole bunch of huge benefits too. And then it's okay. So now are you going to alcohol or water extract it?
Yeah.
And you can do a dual extraction. You can do a single extraction. So we choose, like in our brand, like we choose like dual extractions when we need it. We'll do water extractions when we want to just get the water soluble components. And the idea really at the end of the day is that mushrooms as a whole, as a species, have components that are common to all of them. Beta glucans is one of them, and that seems to be the acid test for people to see quality. But the problem is that if you only look at beta glucans, then you're only looking at the most common denominator of all the mushrooms. And you might as well, if that's your acid test, they're all the same. And so really it's those, like we were talking about, those individual components like cordycepin in cordyceps. That's what you should be looking at, right? In reishi, we should be looking at these ganoduric acids and looking at adenosine and these kind of things. And when we start doing that, as soon as companies start standardizing their products so they can show these, and we get studies that basically just take that extracted component and study it instead of studying this like mishmash of stuff in your body, that's when we're going to actually see the real benefits of these functional mushrooms, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. Related to concussion too, what are your thoughts about the use of ketones? My thought is that ketones are kind of interesting, especially using ketone esters and ketone salts. Obviously, I'm biased because I do scientific consulting for Tecton, which does ketone esters. So take that with whatever grain of salt or whatever, I guess. But they seem to have anti-inflammatory effects on their own. They do cross the blood-brain barrier, and they also appear after a concussion, like post, to provide an energy source to the brain, because glucose metabolism a lot of times gets just really screwed up, for lack of a better word, in simple terms. So they seem to provide anti-inflammatory and energy effects in the brain, because it has kind of this massive energy crisis because the glucose metabolism that it normally uses is all kind of screwed up.
100%. BHB is like I think it's probably for post-concussive.
Yeah.
Absolutely important. And I think I think the innovation of having these ketone supplements is huge for the concussive industry. And I have no association at all with any companies, except for I want to try out the stuff that you're getting.
Yeah, let me know if you didn't get it, but we'll talk about that
I haven't
later.
got it yet, but anyway.
Okay, yeah, we'll get you some.
But the point is, you're right. Like glucose metabolism goes sideways, and that's actually one of the big issues post-concussive. And a lot of the data that came from BHB supplementation came from ketogenic diets working really well in people with concussive symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with ketogenic diet is it's very low variety, very low, all the things that we just talked about.
Compliance, time.
So you end up with like very little plant material and that kind of stuff in it. And so my thing was always, man, you're treating the concussion to get these endogenous ketones going. But in the meantime, we're creating what I would consider not a great digestive health situation if this is a chronic diet for life, just to try and get our body to produce these things. And so now that we have these supplements, is wonderful because we can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. You can include them in your diet, and you can still have all of the important components of the diet in there while augmenting the blood levels of ketones. And I think that's a great thing. And the data are there. There's years of data. In fact, I think the ketogenic diet was one of the first things to kind of be utilized as concussive support agent.
Yeah, and if people want more, I'll link to it. I did a whole program for the Carrick Institute on the use of ketones, ketogenic diet for concussion, TBI, and that kind of stuff. Do you think they may have a prophylactic use to be used potentially beforehand? One of the things I put up on Facebook, God, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, right when the ketone esters kind of showed up, was maybe in the future they'll have, I think of the NFL, right? I mean, you've got freaky athletes running full speed into each other all the time, right? I'm a fan of the NFL. I like watching it. Maybe they'll have like the blue container is your ketone esters, and then the red container is like your glucose. And maybe you have some players would use ketones during the game or after, or if they have symptoms. Or any thoughts on that in terms of a prophylactic, like consuming it beforehand, especially if you know you're going to be competing, let's say on Sunday at noon for a couple hours?
Yeah, in terms of the impact on neuroinflammation, absolutely. I guess the assumption would be that if these guys are going into this game or whatever without having concussive injury already mounted on top of it, they should be regulating glucose and everything perfectly fine in their
right.
brain. So in terms of the anti-inflammatory effects, 100%, especially in guys though, the guys they're taking the hits the most. Yeah, so that's where you choose, like you're choosing the blue container or the red container kind of thing. And 100%. But I think the biggest problem, the toughest issue in any of these sports is being able to get these guys so the supplement's great, right? They go into it, the sport's good, but what are they doing before that game?
Oh, sure.
Dietary, right? And that's the one that so for me, one of the best prophylactics that the data I think would really support is a high quality blood-brain barrier crossing magnesium, like magnesium 3 and 8. And the reason why is because if you look at data on concussion, if you look at it in animals and look at magnesium levels in the brain, they drop about 70% within the first minutes.
That's pretty fast.
Inflammatory insult. Keeping magnesium high would be a really good one in my eyes. BHBs, I think, would be a really nice one to have on board in those in the linebackers and those dudes that are going to be like nailing guys constantly, consistently throughout the game, but mainly we can debate this one, by the way, because I'm like really not versed enough in it. But in terms of prophylaxis, I would say I don't know. But in terms of if the guy's going to get concussed, 100% awesome, because it keeps the energy homeostasis there in that concussive insult. Yeah. But I do know that magnesium is one of those ones that is underestimated, and it drops like mad immediately after concussive insult.
And I think bisglycinate also crosses the blood-brain barrier. Is that correct?
It does. And to tell you the truth, I mean,
tastes like shit, but
most magnesium will cross, depending on what it's what it's chelated to, at some relative level. Magnesium 3 and 8 is supposed to be the one, based on the data when they measure it against the magnesium gluconate in milk and these kind of things. It's supposed to cross like the fastest and with the most robustness by measuring CSF. They can measure magnesium levels elevating within minutes of taking it.
Very cool. Anything else on your list there? My two thoughts I had were fish oil and creatine.
That's the two I was going to use.
Okay.
Yes.
We didn't compare notes beforehand, so
Yeah. Omegas, for the obvious reasons, relatively good anti-inflammatory effects. We know they have brain protective effects. Most people aren't getting enough omega-3. So I generally recommend the athletes take 3 to 6 grams of DHA, EPA combined a day.
That's pretty high. Do you find that they're pretty deficient? Is that kind of the main reason for the higher dose then?
Yeah, and I do find that depending on how much other fats they're eating in their diet. So if they're a big guy eating a mass amount of saturated fat and whatnot, it's really that omega-3 balance, right?
Sure.
And so you just need more.
Yeah.
I tend to measure it. I usually get them to measure it, and I usually measure. You can usually tell by their triglycerides and their HDL and LDL whether or not they're eating the right amount and right types of fats in balance. That's generally what I do. But yeah, I'm usually a high omega-3 guy. Like 3 grams is kind of my baseline, which is
I go with 2 to 4. And I have them do like an omega-3 blood spot. So they'll prick their finger, put it on a little piece of paper, send it in. It'll run every lipid, and then I'll look at the red blood cell content also. So I can make sure that they're actually getting it from the blood actually into the cell membrane, which again, I say I've been doing that for 10 years, and I've probably only seen like a couple people where that was an issue. But if that's really messed up, then I refer them out because they got some issues going on.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And really, we've kind of overblown the omega-3, omega-6 thing a little bit.
Yes.
And we can talk about that another time because I know we have to get off this call, but it's been a little overblown. And I think omega-3s are actually getting overprescribed now, to tell you the truth. Because I look at the balance of omega-3 to omega-6 in people's diets now, it's usually pushing toward omega-3 pretty hard.
Yeah. I used to see one of the extreme. I still see a lot of people that are extremely low, but I have seen more people the last couple of years that are like ridiculously high on omega-3s.
Yeah.
And that might be a good podcast for another day of, can you oversaturate on omega-3? There's potentially some immune suppressant issues or some other stuff. But yeah, I had myself and one other guy tried to basically hyperdose on omega-3, but we looked at the RBC score, and it appears that you can only saturate that to a certain point. So there might be maybe a little bit of a safe protective upper limit potentially.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I ever see when people take too much is they have a lot of bruising.
They can, yeah.
They get a lot of bruising. That's about it.
Yeah. And as we wrap up here,
creatine for anything.
Creatine, yeah.
It's been the best supplement ever made. And I mean, it just keeps proving itself to be better and better. 3 to 5 grams a day. Take it every day. Good for the brain, good for the body, good for muscle mass. Yeah. Overall, just a great supplement.
For neuro effects, would you go higher? If I have people who I know for sure are going to be in a contact sport and they're generally healthy, I've had them go up to 10 to 20 grams because we don't have very good data. You have to use MRS to look at brain saturation levels. We know they're higher, but you talk to researchers like Eric Rolfson and other guys, and we really don't know the best dose yet.
Yeah, we don't really know it. And I'm basing it on saturation in muscle.
Yeah, just 3 to 5 grams of muscle for sure.
And we can saturate muscle with 3 to 5 grams, no problem. So I tend to but my big guys, like same with the guys that are going into the football players and the hockey players, generally are 10 to 20 grams, 10, 15 grams a day. I usually do 3 times a day or something.
Yeah, perfect. Anything else you would add as we wrap up here? I love the list. It turns out we actually compared pretty close. The only one I had, which were 2 maybes, one was potentially astaxanthin as a supplement, although I haven't seen any direct data per se, just from talking to researchers and other people.
But the inflammatory, the oxidative and inflammatory effects are great, right?
Yeah, same idea.
Yeah. And yes, it's all about if you can bring down inflammation, bring down that oxidative stress, at least normalize it so that when you go into a concussive insult, then at least you have the substrates on board that can take care of the increase in all those issues that are going to occur when you've banged your head.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for all the great information. Really appreciate it. I know you've been on here before. We'll link to the podcast you were on here before. And where can people find more information about you? And I know you'll be at the Swiss conference. Unfortunately, I'm presenting at another conference literally that same weekend. Unfortunately, I won't be there, but let us know if there's any other conferences, anything else we should check out.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing the Strong New York thing in November, but you can reach out to me anytime at DRDN Jackson on Instagram, X, and Facebook. Generally, Instagram is the best place to reach out to me because that's the one I actually check the most. And you can check out my website at www.drdwaynejackson.com.
And then the mushrooms are at, is it vibemushrooms.com? Is that right?
Vibemushrooms.ca.
.ca. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thanks again. We really appreciate all the data. That's awesome.
Thanks, Doc. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care, brother.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Huge thanks to Dr. Dwayne Jackson for coming on here once again. Make sure to check out the other episode we did with him. We'll put a link down there in the show notes so you can go to that directly. Make sure to check out all the wonderful stuff that he's got going on. Really great stuff, and a huge thanks to him again for coming on the podcast. And always fun to chat with him about what he views as useful and compare notes, which was great. If you enjoyed this podcast, check out the newsletter I have. You can actually get to it by miketnelson.com/podcast. Scroll down a little bit. You'll see all the podcasts there in case you missed some back episodes. And you can also get onto the newsletter completely free. Probably 90+% of my content goes out directly to the subscriber-only newsletter. So check that out there. If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to send to someone you may think they enjoy it. And also hit the little subscribe button there. That helps us with all the wonderful little algorithms to get more people on the podcast and just keep the show going. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you listening. And we look forward to chatting with all of you next week.
You suppose they have any life on other planets?
What do you care? You don't have any life on this one.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician